Well, so I want to hand over to Simone, who's going to be our next speaker. And Simone also, similar to Patrick, comes with an amazing bio and profile. Currently is working in higher education and a specialist really in the academic development and support around Faculty of Humanity at UJ, but also more so around that, somebody that's also a 4IR ambassador at the University of Johannesburg and a doctoral candidate at the moment around this topic. So on that note, and I'd really like to quote something that Simone shared with us, and I think it's so relevant to all of us, is that when you get given, when you learn, teach, and we're all learning today from each other. So thank you for sharing that with us, Simone. So on that note, I'd like to hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Kay, for the introduction. It's lovely to be here. Thank you, Patrick. Patrick and I are colleagues. It's always amazing to present together, but without further ado, let me get started. So my name is Simone. I have worked in higher education for the past 7 years, coming from an academic development space. I'm actually a specialist also in terms of strategic communication. That's my background. And I've landed up in higher education and focused on Fourth Industrial Revolution special projects while I was there. I coordinated the development and management in terms of the operations of a short learning course, and a MOOC, a massive open online access course called Artificial Intelligence in the Fourth Industrial Revolution at the university. I worked with district officials in terms of 4-hour study visits. So I'm hoping to take all of this experience and share it with all of you today in the hopes that you can take it and reflect on what it means to communicate and lead in the spaces that you're finding yourself in. And so I'm thankful that Patrick actually set a nice foundation in terms of what is the 4IR, because what I'm going to now do is help unpack that in terms of what it means regarding how we communicate and how we lead. Because ultimately, as educators and also essentially as business leaders, we're communicating all the time. And so as much as we become fixated on these technologies, I personally find that we need to also reflect on ourselves and what it means for us to be in this process, and how our own values and who we are also indirectly affects decision making, and our students and our parents and our colleagues. And so it's not just about these technologies, but also how we communicate these technologies. And essentially the one point that I want everyone to reflect on as I'm speaking today is becoming an agent of translation and transformation. So those two key terms is what I want everyone to think about today: translation and transformation. So what do we understand about these technologies? Do we know what they are? Are we playing around with them ourselves as leaders, as educators? Are we communicating with our stakeholders and our students and our colleagues in terms of what these technologies mean for our business, for our offerings? And how can we transform what we are doing with our understanding of these technologies? So translation, so how we communicate, and transformation, what we do with that and how we lead and take it forward. So I've also got a presentation. I'm just going to share my screen with everyone. All right, so I've titled my presentation Leadership Development and the Role of Communication in Teaching and Learning in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. However, I do know that we have a number of attendees who are not necessarily from teaching and learning spaces, so please don't feel excluded. My presentation is quite interchangeable, I think, amongst industries. So really what I'm just going to be focusing on is then just leadership development and the role of communication and how this fits into Fourth Industrial Revolution spaces, and how we can become an agent of translation and transformation. So just to recap what Patrick was speaking about, we're already consuming artificial intelligence-driven technologies without even realizing it. So I know a lot of us have a tendency to think that AI is about robots, and it is to some extent, but not entirely. So artificial intelligence-driven technologies will come across, for instance, when we are driving in an Uber, and we're using our phone to connect with an Uber driver to take us to a destination. You may find that when you're typing an email in Gmail, suddenly the email starts to kind of compose itself. You may find that when you're on YouTube and you're looking for a song or you're looking for something to shop, and then suddenly you get those suggestions, that kind of similar suggestions to what you've been searching for. So that's an example of machine learning algorithms that are coming into play. And so, like I said, you're interacting with automation on the daily. And I think even our students, they don't often realize that it's as simple as that. And I think that's what I'm hoping to also kind of bring down for everyone today, is to understand that AI-driven technologies are not this intimidating thing. They can be, I think, in certain environments, dependent on the industry that you find yourself in. But I think for teaching and learning purposes, and I think the basics of how we work every day, it's not that intimidating. It's a case of, using simple technologies like WhatsApp and Google to really just streamline our processes. So in terms of 4IR leadership and education, the reason why I joined Leadership with Communication is that communication is a vital component of leadership. I think we all know that no matter what industry, as a leader, the main thing that we're doing in our leadership role is communicating. And so they go hand in hand. And the goal as a leader in the fourth industrial revolution, I'll repeat, is to become an agent of translation and transformation, and to effectively communicate using technologies. Okay, so how we lead and how we communicate with staff and with students, with parents, needs to evolve. And strong leadership in this context means that you have to reflect on your values. So I just want everyone to take a moment and to just sit and reflect on what are your values. And have you ever found that your values are filtered down, to the colleagues and the people that you're working around? Because I think sometimes, we don't often take that step back and think, well, who we are as people, how is that impacting those around us in our decision making? And I argue the importance of values-based leadership, because we can get lost in automation. And the truth is, for me, what's going to keep us grounded as professionals and as educators, as business leaders, is to remember that there needs to be a human-centered approach, and that behind all of this automation and machine learning is a human that can showcase empathy and autonomy and emotion. And so that's why I emphasize the importance of values-based leadership, so that we can still safeguard humanity in the process of getting lost in the chaos sometimes of automation and social media and news and an influx of just information. And so, yes, remember that we are humans behind this. And I think it's important that we remain grounded and reflect on our values throughout this process of becoming digitized. And I think that's something you can also emphasize with your staff members, with your colleagues, with your students, with parents, that they don't feel intimidated by the 4IR. In fact, we actually embrace it as a way to just connect with each other in a different way, and perhaps in a more meaningful way. I think, as Patrick was saying, there's obviously fears around the 4IR, but I think the important part of what we've seen now with COVID-19 is that it's enabled us to connect. And though it may be a different kind of connection, it's still connection. And so that's where strategic communication comes into play. It's the ability to communicate in a meaningful way. And so I think with this in mind, it allows us to also redefine our industry. So we can redefine what student success means in this particular space, redefine what business success means in this space. And I think something that I want all of you to take is that it's okay to relearn, to unlearn, and to reimagine what you thought success was for you, what you thought education was. Obviously, things are not going to go back to normal now with COVID and, with how we teach and how we learn. But I think allow yourself to be malleable and to adapt to these changes and to just connect in a different way, and to identify how you can communicate differently. And so this is what I'm going to unpack going forward. So something that I've put together that I personally think are 4IR leadership pillars, driving what I've termed strategic harmony, which is a business model which is essentially about collaborative action from the top down. And so the three key things that I think are important for 4IR leadership development is, one, digital fluency. And this is as simple as understanding how to turn on a computer, how to use WhatsApp, how to use social platforms, how to log into your learning management systems. Like as Patrick was saying, how to familiarize yourself with the software that you're using in your business. So digital fluency is number one, absolute must. The second thing is values-based leadership, like I was speaking about now, which drives collaborative action, where we all, I want to say it's a lateral kind of approach in terms of not speaking down to people, but rather collaborating and figuring out things together. Because like Kay was saying with that quote that I like, it's about giving and learning together. I think that may be an approach that you may want to consider taking with staff, with students, with parents, that you're actually figuring things out together. The last thing, my apologies, is continuous learning. And this is probably the most important thing for me. And I come from a formal education background. However, I personally think that continuous learning and lifelong learning needs to be a nice balance of both formal and informal learning. So this is a case of, supplementing a formal qualification with short courses that you may find online. I think some of you will be familiar with Udemy, with Coursera. I think there's a number of other, LinkedIn Learning even. There's a number of free things that you can do to just supplement those formal qualifications. And I absolutely have to put this forward to everyone here, no matter what industry you are from, that you have to continuously learn, and you have to push your staff to learn, and your students and the parents, because that's how you're going to be able to make the right educational choices. Okay, so in terms of 4IR in action, I think what I've decided to take regarding my approach with this presentation is that this is a more practical slide for those of you who are maybe wanting some ideas. It is mostly education focused, but I think those of you who are perhaps from a different space will also be able to adapt some of these learnings. So 4IR in action is basically practical examples of how you can infuse 4IR into your space. And so like I've said here, point number one is continuous learning opportunities for students and educators and staff members. So are you encouraging your workforce to enroll in free online short courses? It's as simple as providing a list. I think the more you can infuse a culture of learning and get people to want to learn, you know that you're working with the right teams as well. And you know that those are also the right educators, because they'll almost bring those learnings down to their students as ambassadors and advocates for learning. So enroll in free short courses. Digital fluency 101 sessions. It can be as simple as bringing someone in to just speak about how to use WhatsApp in a way that it can work for you as an educator, where I know, in my breakout room, we spoke about, the digital divide. What can we do on our cell phones? Are we using our resources at hand the best way that we can? So digital fluency sessions, using, very simple programs we've got on our cell phone, making use of free online resources in blended teaching and learning. So what I found, I used to be a public relations educator once upon a time, and I was lecturing a module called professional practice. Our students needed to be able to walk out of my course with a CV that they could present to an employer. So essentially, I was tasked to have employable graduates after leaving my course. And I thought, okay, what can they create when they are with me as an educator, that once they leave the classroom, they actually have that physical or a digital artifact that they can present to an employer? And so I thought, okay, I'm going to teach my students to use free software on Google. Anyone can use it to tell their story and then share that with an employer one day. So it's something that they learned how to use online. It was free. They created it, they walked away. I wasn't left with it as an educator. They actually had that as a leave behind. And so Canva is something I promise you will not regret. Canva, just Google Canva, Canva. You can create digital invitations on there, social media templates. You can create a CV. It's a wonderful platform that actually gives you the opportunity to create. And I think my students actually learned how to develop CVs on this platform, and they actually then uploaded their little digital CVs that they created into a Google site. So something that my students created was it was a portfolio, a digital portfolio. And it was from Google Sites, where they created their own websites. It was free naturally. They uploaded their digital artifacts that they would create into their Google site. And all they would do with a prospective employer or with me as an educator was to actually just share the hyperlink of their site. And so that's an example of just learning about what is free and available at hand and letting our students explore. And so that's also an interesting way in which you can learn how to assess differently. I think, these kind of assessments will become increasingly important, especially with the digital space that we find ourselves in, where we are doing a lot of Zoom meetings. We aren't meeting people face to face all the time. And I just think the skill sets are really important for students. Like Patrick was speaking about the 4 C's, which is about creativity, collaboration, communication. And I think if you can create an assessment and allow students to explore these free software and free online resources, you're really ticking all of those boxes. It's not necessarily about, can we bring a robot into our classroom? It's about, how can we assess and test in a way just from using free resources that we can actually access on our smartphones. Another example of how you can infuse 4IR into what you're doing is via short course development. So like I was saying earlier, we wanted our UJ community, and now actually the public, all of you can actually do this as well, is to become familiar with automation and AI-driven technologies and what it means for us. And so we developed a short course on our online learning management system called Blackboard, and it's completely self-paced. There are instructors that are present, but there aren't any set lectures. Students can work at their own time when they want to. There's YouTube videos, there's imagery, there's a lot of rich content in there that if, for instance, if you were browsing on Google, for example, you'd be able to almost get the same experience in this kind of course. It's fully free, fully online. I'll tap into it a little bit later, but that's an example of how communication comes into play in a teaching and learning space. So it's not just about knowing how to verbally communicate in a meeting if you're a leader, but also how to chunk that information in a way that is meaningful for your audience, in which case I'm speaking now about students. The next thing that I highly recommend you do in whatever environment that you're in as a leader is some social media or PR, public relations training. It can be as simple as empowering your educators or your workforce to be aware of social media nuances. I think a lot of us have seen now with this pandemic, fake news is absolutely everywhere. You may find that you're absolutely inundated with so much information that you may struggle to identify what is true and what is not. And if you are struggling with that, I can tell you the lower level employees and your students and parents may be struggling with the same thing. And I think that ability to identify what is fake and what is credible, and to also have these open conversations with your workforce and with students and parents so that they can become tech savvy. So for me, 4R is not just about learning how to work with technology, but learning how to understand how technology is flawed at times. There's so much information, but knowing how to unpack it and digest it and explore it in a way that is ethical and also doesn't overwhelm us and overwhelm our students, overwhelm our staff, and just identify what is fake and what is not is very important. I also encourage all of you to act as ambassadors in your space. So for those principals, for example, who are joined in here, I encourage you to, identify those educators that work beneath you or with you rather, and appoint them as ambassadors, because what we found at UJ that works quite well is sometimes learning happens through other people. It's not a case of sitting in front of a screen, reading a book, and that's how you learn. Sometimes it's in reflecting through other people. So for instance, Patrick and I are Fourth Industrial Revolution ambassadors, and we often share 4R news with our audiences via our social media channels. And we found that a lot of our audiences are actually learning easily via connecting with us as people, because it's one, less intimidating, because it's almost conversational. And students don't realize that that is learning. I think we think that learning needs to happen in these traditional, conventional ways, but learning is beautiful in that learning is happening all the time. It's just students they're not always aware of that, and that's the beauty of it. So I really encourage school principals here to appoint ambassadors and to encourage their educators to be advocates for a cause. whether that is STEM education, whether that's robotics, whether that's any topic, and this really goes across all industries, you may find that a lot of learning happens through advocacy and through just reflecting through others. Because essentially, I think students will love to learn when they see that they are learning from someone who loves to learn. So like Patrick here was a very charismatic educator. I think you may find that rubs off on people. So the same goes for being ambassadors and advocates to a cause. You want your workforce to be passionate about what they're doing and what they're teaching and what they're instilling and empowering. And I think that learners will really respond well to that. And that goes back to what I was saying about values-based leadership. The next thing is career guidance and 4-hour sessions. You may want to consider having this with, again, this is specific to school principals and school educators, that when you're dealing with parents, you know, especially when you're also leaving high school or leaving primary school and you're making those kind of transitional changes, parents are the ones that are actually making those decisions. And I think it's important that we don't exclude them from this conversation. It's not just about educating students and educators, but also educating the parents and the other stakeholders and the sponsors and the bursars that are involved, because they're very much a great part of that decision making. So please don't exclude them, and consider how you can have these open conversations like what we're having now. It could be as simple as a Zoom chat, you know, amongst educators in separate groups, with parents evenings, even for those business leaders, just, you know, sitting down with HR, with your different leaders of the different divisions and having open conversations about how much do we know and what do we still need to learn. It's as simple as that. Cybersecurity is something I want everyone to consider. So, for instance, how aware are we of our passwords that we're using when we're signing into all of these online learning platforms or online social media platforms? Are our students and our workforce aware of, you know, the protection of personal information, that, you know, there are data leaks and important information can get leaked out, and hacking? And, you know, this is probably one of the biggest disadvantages of the 4IR. And I think you may find even on a cell phone, for those of us just using cell phones, that, you know, we've been hacked before, or, you know, suddenly marketers have gotten hold of our details. I think it's just important to be aware of cybersecurity and how best to protect ourselves in this space. And yeah, the last thing there is identifying fake news and ensuring that we're very self-aware and we encourage those around us to be as self-aware. Okay, I'm going to try and wrap this up very quickly. I know time isn't on our side, but as an example of something that we're doing at the University of Johannesburg, which I think perhaps some of you, no matter what industry you're in, could adopt into your space, is, like I say here, we've got a couple of future-focused initiatives in terms of 4IR, in terms of ensuring that our community is constantly updated. So this is either via the appointment of ambassadors, in which case we've identified lecturers and young academics where students are kind of learning through us. We've got podcasts that we upload on our website where people are speaking on radio in different languages to ensure that it's inclusive and everyone can understand the 4IR information. We've got our free and paid for 4IR short courses. We've got virtual panel debates. We have an online magazine. So I think there's the opportunities are really endless in terms of how we take this kind of information that we have and package it in a way that it makes sense for whoever we are speaking to. Again, this goes back to what I emphasize about communication and being an agent of translation. What is the information we need to get across, and how best do we need to communicate that? So whether it's a student community, whether it's your parents, whether it's anyone in the workspace, just think about the online opportunities. But really, I think chunking information in a way that makes sense, it can be as simple as a WhatsApp. It can be an email newsletter. So just I think you can think simply when it comes to 4IR in action. And then, yeah, I spoke about our online course earlier in terms of what we created for our community, which is a MOOC, a massive open online course. And what was really nice about this was the presentation of information in a unique way. So it wasn't just a case of, here's a textbook, read it and we'll give you an exam. It was a case of packaging information in a way online where we downloaded YouTube videos for students to watch. We provided transcripts where, for instance, if you were visually impaired and you couldn't watch a YouTube video inside this online course, you could actually click on a PDF which just translated it, and you could access that PDF in Braille as well. So we were very aware of how, the sensitivity around certain groups of students, and are we connecting properly with everyone? Have we left anyone out? For those of the students who didn't have access to a lot of data, we made sure that we uploaded videos that were very small in size, that the images didn't need to show if you didn't want them to. You could view the entire course on a cell phone. So we were very aware that, not everyone has access to a laptop that you can access this course via our learning management system, Blackboard. So how could we appeal to a group where we were trying to hopefully tick all of the boxes in terms of, making sure it was inclusive, making sure we presented information in a very unique, innovative way, that it was fun, that it was engaging. The questions in terms of how we assessed students was completely automated. And so it was multiple choice questions, which removed the educator from needing to manually assess 16,000 students. We were able to just automate that, build in multiple choice questions, and the system marks it automatically. And so this is the beauty of technology, is that it can streamline processes and you can bring on much bigger groups for learning experiences. So yeah, the reason why I'm explaining this is to help you understand that the opportunities are really endless in terms of how you present information. It's just a case of sometimes thinking a little bit innovatively and realizing that it's as simple as wanting to just go through Google, and that's how we learn, that if we can just present that in a way on an online course, perhaps we can grab students differently and excite them about the learning experience and the learning journey. In this particular course, and this is accessible to all of you, and so I actually encourage everyone that's joined in today to check out this URL that I've put here. I will paste it, or hopefully Nonklankla or someone from the team can actually paste that URL into the chat, and you can actually physically go and check out what I'm explaining to you now in terms of how we are innovating in education. And these are the units that we unpack in this course. We look at 4IR and automation. We look at AI in the real world and how we're interacting with AI every day. We look at AI in China. We look at what this means for the future of work. And you may find that your learnings from this could even inspire you to teach your workforce. So I'd like to just conclude with everything that I've been speaking about with a reflection. And you can choose to answer this, I think, amongst yourself. You can write it on a piece of paper. You can answer it in the chat. I think it might be interesting to see what people's answers are. But I want to end off by saying, with everything that I've said now, no matter what industry you are from, are you an agent of translation, which is making sense of information and communicating it in an effective way and in a meaningful way? And how can you transform your space with technology? So what are you currently doing to understand the 4IR? Think about this. And this is something you can pose to your staff and your students as well. What are you currently doing to understand the 4IR? So a lot of us understand what 4IR is, and a lot of people also said they don't. So the first step is to just ask yourself, well, what are you doing? And there doesn't need to be an answer, but it's that's going to catapult you to actually do something about it. So what are you currently doing to understand the 4IR? Number two, what can you do to enable 4IR learning in your school or in your workplace? Like I said, there are free online courses, Udemy, Coursera, LinkedIn Learning. Being a good leader means sharing these resources with your people and making sure that you are learning and you are inspiring others to learn with you. And number three, can you identify ways in which you can communicate better or differently with your students, staff, colleagues, parents with technology? So just think about it. Translation and transformation, and what are you doing to become that agent? And that is me from my presentation. You're welcome to connect with me online. My handle is @sim_Carter, SIM_Carter. And yeah, you're welcome to email me, pop messages in the chat. I'm happy to connect with everyone. I think, let me just stop sharing.